I'm going to encourage people to ask questions as we go along. As I was telling Dave, it'll probably make more sense if the questions are in context. So I will try to keep up with it as best I can. And if Dave sees something urgent, he'll interrupt me too. That's quite all right. So your complaint when you give an evaluation of this day to Dave, you're going to say, tried to cover too much material in too short a time. Guilty. This is a big topic, but what I am going to focus on are the things that I think are likely to come up in the CRA exam. So NIH is the world's largest funder of biomedical research. This year notwithstanding, it still pours out billions of dollars on the average of about $45 billion towards research each year. Where do you begin? There's two documents or two things I would go for. One is the grants policy statement. And particularly I would look at sections 4 and 7 for the exam. 4 is on public policy, the various public policies that are govern all grants, regardless, all federal grants. And then 7 are the cost principles and cost elements. It makes it a very easy way to study up for the exam if you study those two sections, 4 and 7. I don't know another federal agency that has corresponding document that you can use for those two sections. And then there is also frequently asked questions. When you have any question about NIH or specific processes, there's the place to go. It will probably send you to a page that will talk about something ad nauseum. So financial conflict of interest, you'll hop off of there and go to a financial conflict of interest page. NIH is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. It's one of 8 public health agencies, and a good acronym person can identify all of those. Currently, NIH consists of 27 institutes and centers. Only 24 of those actually make grant awards. And I say currently, there is talk afoot about consolidating the centers. And one proposal I've seen would actually reduce the number of funding centers from 24 to 8. So not sure when or how that's going to happen, but I think we will see some institutes disappear over the next few months or year. And again, it's important to understand that each institute or center has its own mission and priorities and discrete funding mechanisms, so that as you are trying to help a researcher, knowing what each institute does, it's not one size fits all among the institutes. There are the 27 institutes, the 3 at the bottom, the Clinical Center, the Center for Information Technology, and the Center for Scientific Review do not award grants. There are 4 funding instruments that the NIH uses. It uses the grants, cooperative agreements, and contracts, and the other transactional authorities. You should know the difference. The grant and cooperative agreements are assistance. Contracts are acquisition. Other transactional authorities are something unique. They're not assistance, and they're not quite acquisition either. Each opportunity is on a single opportunity basis. You respond to research opportunity announcements, ROAs, as opposed to NOFOs or funding opportunity announcements. They are opportunity specific, and only a couple of the institutes actually use all 4 funding instruments, but those are the 4 funding instruments that are also used across the federal government. Okay, again, grants, I see what's happening with my slides. Cooperative agreements, if you see a grant number with a U, it's a cooperative agreement. And a cooperative agreement is, some people will say it's a cost between a grant and a contract, but a cooperative agreement has substantive involvement by the federal agency. It is not a contract, it is assistance. And all those extra terms and conditions are spelled out in the original funding opportunity announcement. Contracts, and again, the N series, part of the grant number, if you see an N, it's a contract. And then those other transactional authorities, you'll see the letters OT. And you say, well, letters, what is that about? Well, let me give you a breakdown of the grant number as it's used by all HHS agencies, including the FDA and the Centers for Disease Control. It's broken up into these parts of activity type, or application type, activity code, the institute or center, a serial number, the year of support, and then certain suffixes that apply. And so there are 9 application types. The ones that you're going to be most familiar with is the first time a grant is awarded, it'll be a type 1. And then after the first year of that new application is funded, it is a type 5. And then after the 5 years of a grant, PI puts in for a competitive renewal. That first one will be a type 2. Again, I give you these, not that anybody would memorize, ask you to memorize them for a test, but it helps you appreciate the different kinds of grants there are. There's 24 institutes and centers, 24 double letters that tell you exactly which institute is administering. It isn't necessarily where the money is from, but who's administering the grant. Some make sense, like AA, alcohol abuse. Yes, that makes sense. TW for Fogarty, probably back in the day when there was an airline called Trans World Airlines is why it was given that name. So you're going to see an alphabet soup of NIH grants where, and these are the categories of grants that NIH works with. There are research project grants, mostly R and U awards, but it's important to know if you're working with NIH PIs, not all RPGs are Rs and not all Rs are RPGs. Why do you care? It affects the ease of access with the money. There are 4 R mechanisms that are for small businesses. You say, now, why do I care about small businesses? I promise you, you've got really bright faculty that are trying to get funding. They will all believe that they can, or many will believe that they can start their own business and seek these grants that are only for small businesses. And they can cause you, if one of your PIs goes for small business grants, that's great, but they can cause you a lot of heartache. Center grants, these are large multi-project grants. Then there's this alphabet blur, everything from CO6, S10, SC1s. I call it the alphabet blur, but there are other research, supporting other research endeavors across the NIH. There are research career awards, K awards, mostly that help new investigators get a foothold in their research career. There are training grants and there are fellowships. And I'll throw a few facts and then tie it all together. NIH has over 240 activity codes, but only about 110 or 120 are awarded in each year. Some codes are awarded every year, like the R01. You'll hear it called R01, but that O is a 0. The R01 is awarded every year. Some aren't awarded every year. One IC may award 50 different activity codes. Another one may only award 12. And actually, the median across the NIH is about 35. There are 30 codes that are only about 30 codes that are awarded by more than half of the ICs. And there are 30 codes that are only awarded by a single IC, not counting the ones that are unique to the Office of the Director. So why does that matter? It's critical to remind PIs to look at each IC's webpage to see what mechanisms activity codes each supports. It's also important to review the NOFOs and relevant notices from the NIH guide. We're going to talk about NOFOs in a second. They're making a big change. But again, a NOFO will tell you which institutes or centers are supporting a particular funding opportunity. And I really encourage PIs to talk to program staff. Program don't want applications out. I say talk is doesn't happen that often, but they are very responsive to emails, and it saves everybody their most precious resource, which is their time. So notice of funding opportunity, NOFO. I'm finally going to think this year after this lop off funding opportunity announcement. We used funding opportunity announcement for years. I don't know if, I'm assuming that's all been gleaned out of the exam, but using NOFO was NIH adopting what the rest of the federal government was doing. And so again, these are all applications are submitted in response to a funding opportunity announcement, even an idea that's by a PI on their own, and they're written up in the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts. Excuse me. And they're posted on grants.gov. We just had an announcement a few weeks ago that as of October 1st, NOFOs will no longer be published in the NIH Guide, and they will only be posted on grants.gov. So you end up realizing that there are different application types. There are requests for applications, which typically have a single receipt date and funds set aside specifically for that award. There are RFPs, requests for proposals, which are strictly for contracts. Program announcements, which are both solicited and unsolicited. The unsolicited are referred to as parent announcements. And parent announcements didn't exist 10 years ago. They have gained growing use. There are parent announcements, which are totally vanilla as an application type, but people typically will respond to a notice of special interest, a NOSI, rather than a specific topic program announcements. And what we're seeing is that NIH is actually going to great pains to reduce the number of program announcements and working a lot more with NOSIs over the last 5 years. If somebody technically asks you a question, there is a thing called a program, a PAR, which is a program announcement reviewed by the Institute or Center, but not by the Center for Scientific Review. Here's another change. Applications used to be reviewed both by the Center for Scientific Review, and some applications were reviewed by the actual institute. That changed in the spring of this year, and all of review is now in the Center for Scientific Review. They may find some way to bring in IC expertise for these special opportunities, but I wouldn't be surprised if the PAR goes away. And a program set aside, again, a program announcement with set aside funds. I don't think they ask questions about PARs and PAS as an exam, but just if they were, that you've seen them more than once. Then there is this new thing. It's not a NOFO per se. It is a notice. And it is a notice that says, this is what we're interested in. And after October 1st, these will continue to be published in the guide, along with policy notices, corrections, and procedural announcements. So what happens is, and I don't remember if I have a slide in this saying you can apply to be, to get NIH guide notices on a regular basis. And that's great. The NIH guide you can get a weekly listing and find funding opportunities and the notices. If you need to do this I do have this later. I will repeat it later. Let's talk about a NOFO for a second and what it includes. Every NOFO will have an opportunity title and description. It will tell you what ICs are participating. If a scientist, so the one where this really happens and goes haywire is a young researcher wants to apply to a career award. They hear about a particular opportunity, but their area of science, the institute that would sponsor it, does not participate. So looking at the beginning of the NOFO to see which institutes and centers actually participate. If there are due dates, those are listed. The PI, it gives specific PI eligibility and institution eligibility. Most of those, especially for most research project mechanisms, are open. The typical PI eligibility, because sometimes somebody will ask, I'm a foreign national, I have a green card, am I eligible? Well, the PI eligibility almost never says anything about citizenship. It is about people with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to conduct the research. There will be award information, including a NOFO ID number. There are submission requirements, and I'm going through these and not advancing. Sorry, I apologize. The review criteria and the submission requirements, what budget items should be included, how an application is going to be reviewed so that you can know how the application should be constructed, Any deadlines or other requirements are again in there. And then there are IC points of contact. So I mentioned about searching the guide. And again, I would still, if I were in your place and I was doing NIH work on a regular business, I would go to that top link. There is a place for how to subscribe, and you want to subscribe to the weekly table of contents. It'll give you a table of contents. You read the item, and you say, I'm interested, click on it, and you get the full-blown notice for opportunity. I hope all of you are familiar with grants.gov. If you're not, this is a good time to start playing. But again, the search for opportunities is there now. You can look for active announcements. You can always go back for expired announcement. But again, there on the Connect, you can actually apply so that you can get, again, weekly notices about announcements. You can make it as broad by scientific area. You can make it funding agency specific so that you can get announcements about the various funding opportunities. And again, the guide will continue. I expect that while we'll not be able to apply to the NIH guide, they've not been explicit about this. I think they will continue to announce funding interest and point them out as being available in the grants.gov. Once they're in a NOFO, NIH uses Assist that allows you to apply, and the whole application package is there. That's not true of all federal agencies. And you either apply through Assist, or some institutions use system-to-system solutions, or you could conceivably apply on grants.gov. I have never heard of anybody. Have you, Dave, actually using grants.gov for an NIH grant? Would not think it would be advisable.
Correct. I think everybody would use Assist.
And so here are the different things, again, that are part of Assist. And again, if you do NIH business on a regular basis, or if you do NIH and NSF, everything seems to just to fall in place. It's very far-reaching, very precise. Makes from at least one perspective, makes applications. Everything is again in one place. When you start looking at NOFOs, you said about deadlines. Remember, I mentioned that the RFA typically has a single deadline. And most of the other opportunities will talk about using standard deadlines. The standard deadlines are there when there isn't a specific deadline, obviously, but RFAs nearly always have specific deadlines. The other opportunities frequently will refer to standard deadlines. And those standard deadlines are activity code specific. The deadline for R01s is different than the deadline for R21s. They occur 3 times a year, aligning to the 3 council rounds that are held by the NIH. And then AIDS and AIDS-related grants have separate deadlines so there's an R01 deadline and there's an R01 AIDS deadline. And when any NIH deadline falls on a weekend or a holiday, the actual deadline becomes the next business day. That might be an interesting little trick question to ask, because the same thing is true across federal agencies. There are submission policies, and again, some guidelines and how unfunded applications could be submitted. The fact that NIH does not permit overlapping applications, and those are immediately rejected. It doesn't accept late applications. It's just, with respect to late applications, advance permission is never given. And you can have a cover letter explaining the specific reasons. And when you, go to that part of the grants policy statement, it'll explain when a late submission might be considered. Very, very rare situation. I need to insert clinical trials. Now you guys could say, hey, we're here in College Station. We don't have hospitals that do clinical research. I promise you by the NIH different definition, yes, you do clinical research. And nonetheless, you still, as a research administrator, should know the definitions of the clinical trial. Now, these definitions here are the FDA divisions of clinical trials and govern how drug approvals are, how the research to back drug approvals are given, and a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 are very different circumstances and have different requirements. Because of regulations that came through about, I guess it was 2007, clinical trials that are funded by the NIH are subject to, FDAAA. Everybody calls it FDA, the Food and Drug Administration's Act. And it basically talks about registering the clinical trials in clinicaltrials.gov, certain certifications that are needed, how the human subjects are supposed to be enrolled, and how the data is to be reported. And the guidelines for FDA are clearly laid out. A few years after FDA was put in place, probably about 2018, 16, NIH redefined its version of a clinical trial. So you ask these 4 questions. And if you answer yes to the 4 questions, and it doesn't even mean that the whole grant has to apply, but if one element of the grant applies and you say yes to those 4 questions, even if the study is on healthy participants, it is a clinical trial. So this is where your institution could definitely have clinical trials, and that tends to be with behavioral research. So just being aware of this, knowing these 4 questions, if you get a study that you are confused about, there is a decision matrix that can help you decide of whether it's a clinical trial or not. I don't think this has been moved on the, this is so specialized. I don't think this has been moved specifically that you would need to know those 4 questions. But I think it is useful to know that NIH has its own specialized definition of a clinical trial for research grant purposes. And again, to step through, NIH requires all the grants to go through clinicaltrials.gov, even when they're not applicable under FDA. So NIH has a broader expectation for registration in clinicaltrials.gov. And again, research prospectively assigned. So it doesn't have to have a placebo to be a clinical trial. Again, a lot of the health-related biomedical behavioral outcome research is clinical trial by NIH definition. One thing that's important, though, for your helping your researchers to apply, NOFOs are designated, every NOFO, as clinical trial required, clinical trial optional, and clinical trial not allowed. It is really important that you know whether the particular research, which bucket it falls in. If it is a research that says a NOFO that says clinical trial required, and the application that is submitted is not a clinical trial, it will be rejected. Or conversely, if the NOFO is clinical trial not allowed, and you submit, your institution submits a clinical trial, the application will be rejected. And so again, that decision tool that I had 2 slides previous. I want to speak briefly about parent announcements. Parent announcements are these broad funding opportunity announcements that allow applicants to do unsolicited submissions. And they are, and again, they're for specific activity codes. There are anyone is open for up to 3 years by federal law. That's the most any announcement can be good for is 3 years. And that's not just, again, NIH, that's all of the federal government. NOFOs can only be for 3 years at a time without being updated. An important thing, if you're researchers or NIH researchers, not all ICs participate on all parent announcements. So I mentioned the most common mechanism, the R01. Even the R01, not all ICs participate on the parent announcement. They may have a specialized announcement that they participate, but they don't actually participate on the parent announcement, which means you couldn't access the one in particular, the National Center for NCATS. I'm going to something and translational research. I always get the name wrong. They do not participate on the parent R01. And to know that also there is not only just an R01, there's an R01 clinical trials required and optional. There's an R01 clinical trials not required or not allowed, so that they have very different, because there's different requirements in the application process. Clinical trial applications have more information that has to be submitted. Again, participating, checking what ICs participate is just critical. To know that new and early stage investigators have a PI is a new investigator if they've not previously been the PI on an independent research award. You say, what's an independent award? Well, a small award like an R21 or an R03 is not considered substantial. R01s, if they were PO1s, some of those independent awards, if they've never participated as the PI, they will be considered a new investigator. That opens certain opportunities for them. The other is the early stage investigator, ESIs, a new investigator who's within 10 years of completing their terminal research degree and the degree in postdoc. And again, it creates different opportunities, different success rates for those new investigators. How to apply? To go online. There things renew every so often when new programs are being pulled in. We just pulled in a new set of applications. So even, I've got a question about new investigator. So even if the new investigator has applied but has not been awarded, they still qualify as a new investigator. Yes, until they're awarded that substantial independent award, they're still a new investigator. It's all about being awarded the grant. And the same thing is true for early stage investigators. As long as they meet that requirement of within 10 years, they're still an early stage investigator until they get that first independent grant. So how to apply? NIH webpage has the application guide with the general instructions. And there are not only, we're in version I now, that seems possible to us that have been here for a while. So there are general instructions, and then there are instruction sets for research grants, for training grants, for small business grants, independent sets. It's important to know that as you have a NOFO and you have the general directions, the NOFO supersedes the general directions. So always, if there's something, the general directions say turn left, turn left, turn left, and the NOFO says turn right, you're expected to turn right. Excuse me a second. Like all, well, not the federal government all uses electronic research administration with grants.gov. But for an NIH grants, there's two different systems that have to work together. There's grants.gov, and the application actually comes into grants.gov. But there's also the second system called the ERA Commons, and it's NIH's system that's used. NIH uses it in several of the other HHS units that allow, okay, not only do we get it, but it allows the application to be checked to make sure it adheres to what NIH needs. So one has to be, an institution not only has to be registered in the grants.gov, it also has to be registered in the ERA Commons. PIs have to be individually registered in the ERA Commons. So kind of the 3 steps, that ERA Commons registration. This is the steps that are distinct from, say, applying to the NSF. You're going to get that, complete the application, the NOFO, and then you're going to submit the package to grants.gov. Grants.gov goes through its verifications, then it passes the application to the Commons, and the Commons goes through its verifications. So there are literally 2 steps, and something can make it through the Commons and make it through grants.gov, but not make it through the Commons, and you can get an error message and it can be sent back. So exactly, okay, what is the Commons then? Well, it's this online interface where applications, recipients, agency staff are able to conduct their research business. It's not just where the applications go. Once a grant is awarded, a PI can see the status of their application. If the notice of award, it is published in the Commons. We don't have paper anymore. The notices of award, post-award actions, change of institution, prior approvals, they are all done through the Commons. And again, you're going to need that grants.gov, but the RA actually retrieves the application and pulls that information from grants.gov. And that becomes the primary site afterwards for accessing anything about the application or award. I'm not going to go into great detail. You can read these on your own about everything that ERA can do. It's a pretty powerful tool, but everything, even in terms of what is called just-in-time information. At the time an application is going to be awarded, the institute or center will ask for information just in time. David and I have been in the business long enough. We remember when you were expected to submit your IRB approval 60 days after the application was submitted. Doesn't work that way anymore. And we now have most of the information that is time dependent is collected just in time. The annual progress report, the RPPR, I would know what those initials mean. The RPPR has to be submitted through the Commons, and they're typically due 45 days. And you hear some other things. You go, SNAP. What is SNAP? That's Streamlined Non-Competing Award Process, which is unique to NIH. The bulk of NIH grants do not require a detailed budget in the out years in the non-competing continuations, and they are under those streamlined procedures. And the applications are only due 45 days before the next budget period start date. If a grant is non-SNAP, the RPPR is due 60 days before the next budget period start date. And again, the final financial report is there. Closeout documents are submitted there. All those prior approvals are submitted through there. Even the review aspects of it are handled through the Commons. So for you as a research administrator, what do I need to pay attention to on the proposal preparation? Well, thoroughly read the NOFO and the NOCI. Sometimes a NOCI, for example, will give more specific information than the NOFO. Is there human subjects involved? If there is, check if the NIH clinical trial definition is met. Give that link for the decision tree to your PI and help them think through that. read the NOFO again. There is so much packed into it and in terms of what's required and what's due when, that things can easily get met. And the effective research administrator clues their PIs in on what's coming up. Determine if a budget may be detailed or modular. We'll talk about that in a second. Determine if the project involves consortia, subawards, because you're going to need to take extra steps. And then again, I'm repeating myself, but prepare the application with guide in one hand and the NOFO with the other. A NOFO supersedes the application guide. There are 5 NIH budget related policies that you should be aware of. And I think these would be great questions for a CRA exam. Modular budgets, request of $500,000 or more direct costs, consortium indirect salary cap, and the graduate student compensation. You have to submit a modular budget when it's required by the NOFO or when all 4 of these requirements are met. Basically, it's for a select group of mechanisms, R01, R03, R15, R21, R34, or their cooperative agreement equivalents. So you say, what's the cooperative agreement equivalent of an R01? It's a U01. R03, a U03. Okay. The application requests no more than $250,000 direct costs, excluding any consortium F&A, which we'll talk in a second, in any budget period. So if they only need $180,000, give or take, in every year, you're going to request a modular budget. And I'm seeing here, and I think I left this bullet out. What do I mean by modular? You're going to request money in modules of $25,000. So that budget that you work up, because your department's going to make you, your university's going to make you come up with a detailed budget, you're not going to ask for $180,000. You're going to ask for $200,000 a year and justify that larger budget. And then you might say, well, what happens if we don't need the money? I promise you NIH will take it back. It's okay. Or it may not award it. It might, in a situation, if they think that's too much money, they may only award modules up to $175,000. So $200,000 would be 8 modules. $250,000 would be 10 modules. The other 2 things, no human fetal tissue. If there's human fetal tissue involved, it has to be a detailed budget. And foreign organizations always have to submit a detailed budget. Here's a decision tree, again, that you can see if this makes more sense to you. But again, at modules of $25,000 up to $250,000 a year. And you need to start with that detailed budget to know if you're asking the right amount. Generally, there is an expectation that you will ask for the same number of modules every year. When you don't, you're going to explain why. Of course, if you buy a piece of equipment in year 1, you may be asking for an additional 1 or 2 modules that you would for the out years, for example. And that budget justification, you're going to, as good research administrators, you want to have thorough budget justifications on everything. This is when you want to say less. You want to have the budget justification, the personnel justification listed, no roles, but not individual salary information. You're going to say the PI, 3 calendar months, and what they're going to do. 1 graduate student, 12 calendar months. This is what they're going to do. Nothing more. And additional justification is not required if the same modules are requested, but if you have different modules, or if it's a NOFO where you can't spread money across evenly, the R21, you can't ask for the same amount of money in each year, the way the budget is constructed. But you need to have well-justified modular increments. And again, those you need extra explanation. Now, why am I making a big deal about not having the additional narrative justification unless it's absolutely needed? I can promise you that at the other end, those budgets are combed through. And if you start offering information about other costs when it's not needed, that may be a justification for NIH, either program or grants management, to cut back. So you stay silent on it. That's the appropriate thing to do. And again, here's an example of a modular budget. You notice that it steps through. This one has a subcontract. If that subcontract isn't included in the direct costs, it's this. All right, I'm going to say this wrong every time. Consortium indirects are a direct cost, and you request them as a direct cost. However, they don't count towards the direct cost limitation. Did I say that right, David? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, the question, yes, about the DMS plan. You need, so let me talk about DMS plans. Yes, you do need additional justification, but that is narrative. It is not, you're used to, if you do a detailed budget, saying, I need $10,000 for these supplies and you need $5,000 for this other cost. Again, your budget description for the DMS is intended to be narrative on a modular budget. Okay? Any more questions on budgets? So when you fill out this modular budget, again, you've got the consortium, the direct cost, consortium F&A is separate. And so the total, you see how the total direct cost is more than the direct cost we're applying to see whether this needs to be a modular grant. So a reasonable question to ask against, I don't know if they've gotten this specific, you can have a total direct cost of 300,000. Excuse me. And you say, well, a modular grant is only 250. But if the only thing that makes it go over 250 is the consortium indirects, that's okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Cogitate on that one a little bit. Well, another policy, if you request $500,000 or more in any year, you have to get prior approval from a program officer in the Institute. Again, consortium indirects don't apply. I've always been amused. PIs are so smart to how to come in at $499,999 in every year. Works really well. But again, if they're going to be more than 500 in any one year, prior approval is needed. And again, if there's a group of applications that are applying as a grouped consortium, still, if they're all coming in, they need prior approval. The ICs you must contact the IC program officer and get something in writing. So there has to be a cover letter in the application that says, we talked to this program officer, or here is the interaction with the program officer, and that they've agreed to accept the application. This is so, especially the smaller ICs can plan their money expenditure a little bit better. But prior approval is not required for RFAs that have a specific, specified budget limits. An RFA may say 700,000 a year. Fine. You can do it. They already know up front that you're going to do that. So specific, I've given you the NIH guide reference for each one of these 5 policies so you can read about them in further detail. Consortium indirects, we've talked about this. Again, any NOFO that has a direct cost limit does not include consortium F&A when determining that limit. So again, the modular, the consortium F&A can put it over 250, but that consortium F&A does not count against the 250 limit. Now, here's the one that everyone loves to hate. And yes, it's a really, really good CRA question. The salary cap. NIH is the one agency that has been capped at the level it awards its salary. It's equivalent to federal executive level 2 of the pay scale. And when it goes up, so a step back right here. When talking about consortium F&A, so we're talking about the indirect on the consortium, the consortium's F&A. So direct cost normally would be my direct cost, the consortium's direct cost, and the consortium's indirect costs. Those are all direct costs. And what we're saying in terms of that limit, the consortium indirects are taken away and coming up with any cap or limit. Does that make sense? So we're excluding the F&A that the subawardee, the consortium F&A that they are asking for on top of their direct cost. Okay? Back to salary cap. So it really affects mostly medical faculty, but I will venture that you have a number of your chemistry faculty that are over the executive pay scale. In certain disciplines, their salary is such that they are above this, and this would be a 12-month pay scale. So if they're in a 9-month appointment, you have to back it in to figure out what the monthly. So if you want to know what that means, you take the 225,700 divided by 12, and that's the monthly limit of their salary. And in fact, you can take that number, multiply it by 9, and that's their 9-month salary limit. And what this affects is how much NIH will award you, not how much you can pay. So if the salary cap goes up over time, you can pay more. So it's really, really important to identify the salary at the cap in the budget justification, because if you've noted that the salary, you've only asked for the 225,700, and it goes up almost every year, but you asked for the 225,700 and you submitted the application in July, and the next year the salary cap goes up. If you have noted that this is at the cap, the specialist will call you, verify what the current salary, and award you more. Again, the recipient can rebudget, but they won't give you additional money. So that's something to bear in mind. And any amount, of course, is the PI going to take less salary? No, they're going to want their full salary. And that money above the cap is voluntarily cost shared by the institution. So it is cost shared, but it's not a required cost share. If you can convince your PIs not to want the extra money, that would be fine, but nobody's going to do that. I've got the one, it's actually the fiscal year 24 notice, that blue link there. They give you lots of different examples. And it is, somebody's asked the question, is it the wages and fringe benefits? Fringe benefits are not salary. They're additional benefits. So this is limited just to the salary, wages only. And there are lots of little examples in that guide notice, because to be able to back out for a 9-month salary, 12-month salary, even a 50% appointment, knowing how that works. I don't think the CRA exam has gotten silly enough to do something like a 50% appointment, but it's reasonable to take, can you do a 9 months? Do you have to memorize what the current rate, at least when I was working on the exam, we always told you what the current salary cap was to work off of. So now the salary amount, so the question asked, does the salary amount paid increase after the grant is awarded? If you mean what the person is paying, what you're paying the PI, yes, their salary goes up and you can rebudget. But NIH won't give you, for during that competitive segment, NIH won't give you any more money. So let's say we were actually paying 12 months of somebody's salary, and it was $225,700 for 12 months. That's what they're going to award every year of a 5-year grant, even though the PI's salary may go up in each successive year. So the institution has the option to either rebudget to cover that increase or to otherwise use other funds to cover that increase. Does that make sense? Graduate student compensation. The maximum amount awarded for a graduate student, and it includes not just salary, in this case, salary, fringe benefits, and tuition remission, can't be greater than the 0 level postdoc. It's right now it's 62,232. Again, this number bumps up every year. Now, again, the institution can rebudget and pay a higher amount. And you say, well, it may be that A&M isn't, your graduate students aren't at this level. I assure you, institutions like that are in New York or California are way above this level. And so you ask for it, and again, all that will be awarded is at that level. Now, in this case, you could rebudget and pay more than 62,232. In the case with the graduate student, the salary cap, you cannot pay them more than the current salary cap. In this case, you can rebudget and pay them at the higher amount. Now, what I've just sounded may sound confusing, but does that make sense? The salary cap, you can only pay the individual. You will be awarded at the salary cap, and you can only pay the individual at the current salary cap, which may go higher. And you can rebudget to pay at that higher level. From day one, graduate student you could rebudget and pay at the higher level to begin with. NIH is just not going to give you any more money. Budget justification, again, these are elements I would hope that would be in any budget justification. Believe it or not, saw many budgets where it didn't. Again, separate budget is required for any subaward or consortium. There are additional documents that are required in an NIH: a data sharing plan, model organism plan, genomic data sharing plan. And if there are multiple PIs, it's important to know that NIH does not recognize co-investigators or co-PIs. They recognize multiple PIs. And so there's a separate, you can have a grant application with 3 PIs, but one will be a contact PI. NIH has a responsible conduct and research training requirement that's involved with certain mechanisms. Financial conflicts of interest. This requires that NIH has that an institution has a written policy on conflicts of interest that complies with the regulations, and the way that most institutions handle this is they get their PIs to report significant financial conflicts, or significant, which is potential conflicts. But the only time NIH has to disclose, or the institution has to disclose to NIH, is when there is a financial conflict of interest. And so again, if there is a actual conflict, it has to be disclosed at the time of the proposal. And then if the grant is awarded, there is an annual disclosure. And you're looking for the conflict to be reduced or eliminated, generally, or otherwise managed. They will come up with a managed plan to actually manage the conflict. It's having the investigator removed from the data, for example. Again, this was a big deal because PIs had grants doing work on pharmaceuticals that they were also receiving large sums of money from the pharmaceutical company. That was deemed to be unacceptable. Peer review has changed drastically. Again, the important thing to understand is that NIH has a 2-tier review system. where there's a first level of review and a score is given and recommendations are made. And currently there are 3 factors. There's 2 factors that are scored: the importance of the research and rigor and feasibility, and then an expertise in resources. There isn't a score, but the reviewers give a thumbs up or thumbs down about whether the individuals have the expertise and the resources are there at the institution for the research to be done. There is additional things that are looked for at the review process, and comments will be made. But these are not actually scored. There is a scoring table of 1 to 9. At the actual application stage, literally, the scores are given of 1 to 2.2, because the reviewers, I recommend, if you have researchers that don't know how NIH grants are scored, they go online to the NIH YouTube and look up NIH review. There'll be a mock study section, and that will really help people understand how it's scored, which impacts on how a PI writes the grant. But the grants that you will see on the front page of a summary statement are not 1 to 9. They're 10 to 40. Actually, you probably will never see a score above 40 because the bottom half of grants are triaged from the very beginning. My time here. Second level of peer review that is done by council. Council doesn't vote thumbs up or thumbs down, but they generally give concurrence. Only on a handful of exceptional grants will they actually vote thumbs up or thumbs down. And the deal is they don't make the decisions. The actual council does not make funding decisions. The institute, in fact, the actual final decision-making authority rests with the institute director. And so there are 4 different things, again, that can impact. It's not just in the absence of other criteria, it is by score. But if I've got 7 grants on topic and the 8th grant comes along, I may give that grant low program priority. So we have just-in-time information, which we spoke of, those the 3 elements that are required. There are things that during pre-award that are reviewed to make sure that the application, I think I would know the difference between scientific, budgetary, and commitment overlap going into the exam. The notice of award, it is a legally binding document, and all of these elements are funded. To know that there are 2 periods listed on a notice of award, there is a budget period. Since most grants are given money year by year, there are budget periods and the project period. And again, that's streamlined. I mentioned before, non-competing award process, and generally most grants have automatic carryovers. David and I remember back in the day where each year, if you wanted to carry money over from one year to the next, you had to ask. Again, all the terms and conditions, any reporting requirements laid out, as well as contact information. Although because NIH routinely shuffles their portfolios, it's always good to look in the commons and see who the current program officers don't change, but grants management specialists will change a lot. So what constitutes the acceptance of an award? Do you know? When you draw down the first dollar, you've accepted the terms and conditions of award. That's why reading through, even at your department level, reading through and making sure there are no terms and conditions that central office may have missed, something that you're going to be unable to do. Because once you've drawn down the first dollar, you're saying everything's hunky-dory. Except for multi-year funding, we want that next budget period. Again, competitive segments are 1 to 5 years. A budget period is 1 year or less. So you're going to have an annual progress report. And even if you have a multi-year funded award, you have an annual progress report due. And the new notice of award will be issued once that annual report is accepted.